The Peugeot 405 arrived at a time when Peugeot was enjoying a string of successes with models like the 205. The 405 quickly became a great success to the point that today, almost 40 years after its release, different versions of the 405 are still being produced. So, why wasn't the 405, which replaced the 305, called the 306? Why was it so well received in the United States before being withdrawn from the market just 3 years later? And why is it still being manufactured today? Here is the story of the Peugeot 405. Peugeot 405 Peugeot. 405 Peugeot. 405 Peugeot. Peugeot. $408. Peugeot. 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 $40 moves. Peugeot. $4,015 Peugeot. Peugeot 4029, Peugeot 4049, Peugeot. Peugeot 4066. Peugeot 4012. The dashboard offered clear and logical controls with a somewhat light finish but modern equipment for the time. Air conditioning, cruise control, ABS, and heated leather seats. Among the recurring criticisms were the uneven build quality, the very limited equipment on entry-level versions, the fixed rear bench seat, and the somewhat high trunk threshold. The latter improved the rigidity of the body but made loading heavy luggage more difficult. The 405 won the prestigious title of European Car of the Year, a welcome award since it was entering a very competitive market against the Renault 21, the Audi 80, the Volkswagen Passat, the Ford Sierra, and the Opel Ascona. On the sports side at the time, Jean Todt, future president of the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile, was in charge of motorsport at Peugeot. He had already turned the 205 into a rally beast with the 205 Turbo 16, so it was only natural to do the same with the new 405. Plans for a 405 Turbo 16 were made as early as 1985, and it was ready soon after its 1987 launch. The goal was to boost sales of the production models. Peugeot introduced the sporty 405 My 16, featuring a 1.9-liter 16-valve engine with 160 horsepower. The 405 Turbo 16 rally car borrowed many features from the 205 Turbo 16s. It quickly gained fame by winning the Pikes Peak Hill Climb and Paris-Dakar. Outside motorsport, Peugeot expanded its lineup. In 1988, the station wagon arrived, along with new diesel engines. On the United States side, Peugeot had been exporting its cars there since 1958. But in the 1980s, the brand was only surviving there with the aging 505, adding the 405, which was very popular in Europe. And crowned with sporting victories at Pikes Peak, Peugeot hoped to revive its sales across the Atlantic. At first, everything seemed to be going well. The automotive show Motor Week even crowned it as the best imported sedan. The American 405 was better equipped and more competitively priced than its European counterparts. However, the American press criticized its 1.9-liter engine as noisy and weak at high speeds. Compared to large American engines, American buyers preferred to spend a little more money to get German sedans, which were seen as more upscale. As a result, only a few thousand sales per year. Then, the American adventure ended abruptly in 1991, with Peugeot and the 405 completely withdrawing from the North American market. In Europe, however, sales were booming. By 1989, 500,000 units had already been produced, and the 1 million mark was reached the following year. While the 405 hadn't convinced the United States, other countries, on the other hand, were very fond of it. Production started in Chile in 1988, then in Indonesia, Taiwan, and Thailand in 1989. Iran started manufacturing it in 1991, followed by Argentina in 1992, Poland in 1993, and Egypt in 1994. It was also assembled in Malaysia and Zimbabwe. In short, with the upgraded 405, a bit more change was introduced in 1993. A completely new dashboard with better materials, a reinforced chassis, and a bonded windshield, which allowed the trunk threshold to be lowered, a real relief for those who disliked the early model's narrow trunk opening. This 1993 update made the car a bit heavier, which also reduced the agility of the sporty My 16. To compensate, Peugeot launched the 405 T16, a turbocharged version with 200 horsepower. Four-wheel drive hits 100 km/h in 6.7 seconds. All that power could be tempting on French highways. The National Gendarmerie thus bought about 10 405 T16s to try to catch offenders. And in 1995, the logical replacement for the 405 in Europe arrived, the Peugeot 406. But that didn't mean the end of the 405. Production continued for some time in Europe after the launch of the 406. But above all, it continued abroad in Argentina, Chile, Zimbabwe, and especially in Iran. The Iranian story of the 405 is very unique. Since 1966, the company Iran National had been producing the Hillman Hunter, a model from the Roots Group, which was later bought by Chrysler and then by Peugeot Citroën when they acquired Chrysler Europe. But producing a car from the 1960s and 1990 was not viable. The nationalized company, now Iran Khodro, sought a more modern model and agreed with Peugeot to produce the 405. As early as 1991, the first Iranian 405S rolled off the assembly lines. They produced the classic 405, but also an amazing version, the Peugeot RD, which combined the body of a 405. The chassis of the 1960s Hillman Hunter and a 1.6-liter engine from the 1970s Hillman Avenger. A cheerful patchwork that gives the 405 a very high front end compared to the rear, and above all, turns it into a rear-wheel drive. The 405 was so successful in Iran that in 2000, Iran Khodro launched a modernized and more luxurious version, the Peugeot Persia. It could be equipped with more modern engines from the Citroën Xantia, and its style, inspired by the 406 this time, actually hit a real 405 base. It was quickly renamed Peugeot Par. But Iran's ultimate goal was to create a national car, designed and produced locally to make it a symbol of pride. The project started in the 1990s, but the team was severely lacking in experience. Designing a good chassis is expensive. Automotive styling was not mastered, and Iran had never manufactured a gearbox. The result? The project had to fall back on the chassis and transmission of the 405, while the body was designed in the United Kingdom, with a strong influence from the Volkswagen Passat. So in 2001, Iran Khodro launched the Samand, presented as the national car but still based on a heavily modified 405. Thanks to its low manufacturing costs, the Samand enjoyed great success, to the point that it was exported throughout the Middle East, but also to Belarus, China, Egypt, Iraq, Senegal, Syria, and Venezuela. The Samand was restyled in 2007 to become the Sorin with a modernized interior, even though it still featured quite a few elements from the 405. An updated electronic system. And above all, the first engine developed by Iran Khodro, designed with the help of German engineers. In 2015, it evolved again under the name Dena, this time inspired by Mitsubishi. However, the 405's look isn't entirely gone, as the brand launched an Arizona pickup in 2015, based on the chassis of the old Hunter and the front of the 405. A slightly modernized version, the Harrison 2, arrived in 2022, but still with the same old chassis. Yes, in 2022, Iran was still using a chassis from the 60s, and despite everything, these models derived from the 405 remained popular. In 2010, which was 15 years after the end of European production, Iran Khodro was still selling about 300,000 units per year, making the 405 one of Peugeot's best-selling models of the year. In 2017, if you added up the sales of the Pars, Dana, and Harrison, it was the third best-selling Peugeot model in the world. In 2019, production of the Pars ended in Iran, but the assembly lines were transferred to Azerbaijan, where the car was still being produced. In 2023, that represents 38 years of production, more than 5 million units made, and a model that is still alive. Not bad for a car that was originally designed to save costs by reusing as much as possible from the Citroën BX. And do you have any memories with the 405? Tell me about them in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos.